The air grows cool now, as the sun bleeds its final gold and crimson across the western sky. The world is hushing. The frantic buzz of the dayfly has ceased, and the hurried chirp of the robin has softened into a final, sleepy call from the hedgerow. This is the gloaming, the time between times, when the veil that separates the world you know from the world of story grows thin as a moth's wing. Come. Step away from the hard path, from the world of stone and straight lines. Here, at the edge of the wood, the air smells different. It holds the scent of damp earth, of ancient moss clinging to bark, and the sweet decaying perfume of 1,000 autumns gone by. The trees stand like silent sentinels, their branches a tangled lattice-work against the deepening twilight. This is the old world, the first world, and it remembers everything. There, just ahead, where the shadows pool deepest beneath the boughs of a great oak, a figure waits. He is old, but it is an age you cannot count in years. It is the age of the stones he leans against, the age of the river that flows nearby, its voice a constant, soothing murmur. His beard is a cascade of white, like a frozen waterfall, tangled with the occasional twig or dried leaf. His eyes, when they turn to you, are the color of a deep forest pool, and they hold a light that is not of the sun or the moon, but something far older. He wears robes the color of moss and bark, and in his hand he holds a staff of gnarled yew, smooth from the touch of generations. He does not speak his name, for names have power, and his is woven into the fabric of this place. But you may call him the storyteller, the guardian of the old ways. He offers a gentle smile, a slight inclination of his head, and beckons you to follow. The night is a good time for walking. His voice is low and resonant, like the hum of the earth itself, and a better time for listening. The world you leave behind is loud with its own stories, stories of haste and worry. But this world sings a different song, a slower song. Come, walk with me, and I will teach you the tune. You step with him under the canopy of the ancient forest. Instantly, the world changes. The last of the sky vanishes, replaced by a ceiling of leaves, dark and rustling. The air is still and cool on your skin. Your feet, which trod on hard, unyielding ground, now sink softly into a carpet of moss and fallen leaves. The sound of your own footsteps is muffled, gentle. The only sounds are the whisper of the wind in the high branches, the distant call of an owl, and the soft, rhythmic tap of the storyteller's staff upon the earth. Breathe, he says, his voice a calm anchor in the deepening dark. Breathe in the story of this place. Every root, every stone, every drop of dew holds a memory. We walk now, not just through a forest, but through time itself. And all time, all stories, begin with the land. Before gods, before kings, before even the first people, there was the land. There was Ea. He pauses beside a colossal stone, half buried in the earth and cloaked in a thick velvet of green moss. Moonlight, just beginning to pierce the canopy, catches the glistening dewdrops upon it, making it seem as if the stone is weeping silver tears. Listen, the storyteller murmurs, placing a hand against the cold, damp surface of the stone. Listen, and I will tell you of the beginning, not the very beginning, for that is a mystery known only to the silent stars, but the beginning of this green and sacred island. Long, long ago, in a time that exists only in the memory of the hills, this land was a formless thing. It was a canvas awaiting the first stroke of the brush. The sea, the great restless dreaming sea, washed over it, shaping it, carving it, singing to it. For 1,000 years, and 1,000 years more, there was only the dialogue between the water and the stone. The wind was the only breath, the cry of the gull, the only voice. Then, out of the vast, gray expanse of the sea, came the first. There were not gods, not yet. There were pioneers, dreamers, led by a man named Partholon. They came from the west, their boats like slivers of wood upon the endless water, their hearts filled with the hope of a new home. When they first set foot upon the soil of Eir, the land itself seemed to sigh, to awaken from a long slumber. At that time the island was not as you see it now. It was smaller, more compact. There was but one plain, a single stretch of open land called the Old Plain of the Elk. There were only 3 lakes, their waters dark and still, and 9 rivers, their currents slow and meandering. It was a quiet, sleeping world. But the arrival of Partholon and his people was like the arrival of spring after a long winter. They were life, and where they walked, life followed. They tilled the soil, and a single plain seemed to stretch and yawn, growing wider to accommodate them. They dug the first wells, and from the deep heart of the earth, new waters stirred. As they settled, as they lived and loved and worked upon the land responded. It was as if their very presence, their laughter, and their labor was a song that the earth had been waiting to hear. One day, as a grave was being dug for Partholon's own son, the ground gave way, and a great lake burst forth, its waters shimmering and new. This was the first of the 7 lakes that appeared during their time, each one a sudden, miraculous gift from the earth, a testament to the growing bond between the people and the island. They brought with them the first cauldron, the first craft, the first hospitality. They built the first guest house, a place of warmth and welcome. They were the first to brew ale from the wild ferns. They established the first order, the first law. They were the beginning of the story, the first words written upon the empty page of the land. For 300 years they lived in peace, and the island flourished with them. The plains widened, the lakes filled, the rivers ran faster. The land was becoming itself, waking to its own beauty and abundance. But the story of the first people is a sad one, a soft and sorrowful note in the great song of this place. A plague, a great and silent shadow, fell upon them. It came not with the clash of swords or the cry of battle, but as a quiet pestilence on the wind. One by one they fell, until the last of Partholon's people lay silent upon the very plain they had nurtured. The island fell quiet once more. The plains they had cleared grew wild again. The houses they had built crumbled back into the earth. But they were not forgotten. The land remembered them. The 7 lakes they had awakened remained, gleaming like eyes in the green face of the island, a permanent memory of the first touch of life. The story was not over. It had merely paused. The land held its breath and waited. The storyteller falls silent. He runs his hand over the moss on the great stone, his touch infinitely gentle. The forest around you seems to have grown deeper, more ancient in the telling. The moonlight is stronger now, casting long, shifting shadows that dance like spirits between the trees. You walk on, your feet making no sound, following the steady, reassuring presence of your guide. The path begins to slope downwards, and the sound of water grows louder, no longer a distant murmur but a clear, melodic song. You come to the edge of a stream. It is not wide, but it runs swift and clear over a bed of smooth, dark pebbles. The moonlight catches the ripples, making the water's surface glitter with 1,000 tiny diamonds. The storyteller stoops, dipping his cupped hands into the cold water and drinking deeply. He gestures for you to do the same. The water is crisp and pure, tasting of stone and soil and deep, clean earth. It feels as if you are drinking liquid starlight. Water, like the land, remembers. He says, his voice mingling with the sound of the stream. Every story flows into another, just as this stream will flow into a river, and the river into the great sea. After Partholon's people were gone, the island lay empty for 30 years, a generation of silence. Then, once more, the sea offered up a new beginning. This time, they came from the east, a people led by a man named Nemed. They were kin to Partholon, distant cousins carried on the same tide of fate. Their journey was hard. Of the 32 ships that set out, only one, battered and weary, reached the shores of Air. Nemed and his small band of followers stepped onto the land, their hearts heavy with loss, but full of a resilient hope. Like those who came before them, they found a sleeping land, and like them, their presence was an awakening. They cleared 4 new plains, pushing back the endless forest, letting the sunlight touch the soil. And again, the land responded with a gift. 4 more lakes burst forth from the ground during their time, each a sudden, beautiful surprise, a mirror to the sky where once there was only earth. But the world was not entirely empty. In the shadows of the mountains, in the dark fens and on the desolate islands off the coast, lived another race. They were the Fomorians. They were not of the land, but of the sea. They were beings of chaos and shadow, of the cold, crushing deep. They had 1 eye, 1 arm, and 1 leg, their forms a strange and unsettling mockery of the human shape. They represented the wild, untamable power of nature, the storm that shatters the oak, the blight that withers the crop. For a time Nemed and his people fought against the Fomorians, and they were victorious. They were filled with the strength of the new land, the vitality of a people building a home. But Nemed, like all mortals, was touched by time, and he too succumbed to a plague, leaving his people without their leader. And then the Fomorians, who had been biding their time in their watery kingdoms, rose up. They were cruel masters. They imposed a terrible tax upon the people of Nemed, 2/3 of their children, their corn and their milk, to be delivered every year on the eve of Samhain, the night when the worlds draw close. It was a tax of life itself, a tribute of sorrow that bled the people of their hope. For years they suffered under this oppression, their lives shadowed by the constant dread of the Fomorian tax collectors. But the spirit of defiance, though beaten down, was not extinguished. The remaining leaders of Nemed's people, his own descendants, resolved to make one final stand. They gathered all their strength, all their courage, and they sailed to the Fomorian stronghold on Tory Island, a bleak and windswept fortress of rock. They fought with the fury of a people with nothing left to lose. They broke the walls of the Fomorian tower, and for a moment, a single brilliant moment, it seemed they had won their freedom. But the sea itself, the mother of the Fomorians, rose up in their defense. A monstrous tidal wave, a wall of black water and churning foam, crashed down upon the island, swallowing both the Nemedians and the Fomorians in its cold embrace. Of all the thousands who fought that day, only 30 Nemedians survived, cast adrift in a single broken boat. Their great rebellion had ended in devastation. Heartbroken and defeated, they decided they could no longer stay in the land that had promised so much and delivered such sorrow. They divided the world between them and scattered to the 4 corners of the earth. Some went north, some went to the lands that would one day be called Britain, and one group, led by a descendant of Nimd named Britain, traveled south to the sun-drenched shores of Greece. And so, for the second time, the island of Ir was left to the silence. The plains they had cleared were still there. The lakes they had awakened still shimmered under the sun and moon. The land held these memories, these scars, and waited once more. The story, it seemed, was one of constant struggle, of arrivals and departures, of brief joy and long sorrow. But even in this, there was a rhythm, a cycle, a breath held, waiting to be released. The land was not yet whole. It was waiting for its true children. It was waiting for the gods. The storyteller's voice fades into the gurgle of the stream. He looks out into the darkness, his gaze distant, as if he can see those scattered, heartbroken Nemedians on their lonely journeys. You follow his gaze but see only the deep, impenetrable blackness between the trees, a darkness that seems to hold all the stories that have ever been. The air is thick with the scent of wet ferns and rich soil. You feel a deep sense of peace, a quiet understanding of the immense, slow, and patient life of the land itself. You leave the stream behind, and the path begins to climb again, winding its way through a stand of ancient birch trees. Their wide bark seems to glow with a soft, internal luminescence in the moonlight, making them look like a company of silent, graceful ghosts. The ground here is softer still, covered in a thick blanket of fallen leaves that rustle and sigh with every step. "Do you feel it?" the storyteller asks, his voice barely a whisper. "The change in the air?" We are walking into a different part of the story now, a part that is filled with a new kind of light. For 200 years the island was empty, save for the shadows of the Fomorians who had reclaimed it. But the scattered children of Nemed did not forget. In their exile they grew, they learned, and they changed. He leads you into a clearing. In the center stands a circle of tall, slender stones, weathered by centuries of wind and rain. They seem to hum with a quiet energy, and the moonlight pools within the circle as if it were a vessel. The storyteller walks to the center of the circle and turns to face you, his silhouette dark against the star-dusted sky. "The group that fled to Greece," he continues, his voice gaining a new resonance within the circle of stones, "they were enslaved. They were forced to carry bags of earth upon their backs, to build up the barren, rocky plains of that southern land. For this they became known as the Fur Bolg, the men of the bags. But their spirit was not broken. They labored, they endured, and in secret they used their craft to build a fleet of ships from the very bags they were forced to carry. One night, They fled, a great host of them, sailing back across the waters, following the memory of a home they had never seen but which was carried in their blood. They returned to Ir, not as a small band of refugees, but as a proud and organized people. They divided the island into 5 provinces, the 5 great fifths of Ireland, and they established the first high kingship at the sacred hill of Tara. They were a people of the earth. They were strong, dark-haired, and sturdy. They were farmers and builders. They loved order, law, and the simple, honest work of the land. Under their rule, the land knew a time of quiet prosperity. There was justice and fairness. The sun shone, the rains fell, and the harvests were plentiful. They were good custodians of the island, and the land was content. For a time, it seemed the story had found a peaceful and happy chapter. But another group of Nemed's children had fled not south, but to the mysterious, fog-shrouded islands of the north. And there their story took a very different path. They did not toil in the earth. They studied the stars. They learned the secret names of things. They mastered the arts of magic, poetry, and craftsmanship until they were more than human. They became beings of light and air, of skill and knowledge. They became the Tuatha Dé Danann, the people of the goddess Danu. They dwelt in 4 great cities, learning their crafts from 4 great masters. In the city of Phileas, they learned the secrets of stone and sovereignty. In Gorias, they learned the art of the unerring sword, of perfect justice. In Murias, they learned the magic of abundance and nourishment. And in Phineas, they learned the mastery of light and irresistible power. When their time of learning was complete, they knew it was time to return to the land of their ancestors. They did not come in ships of wood, sailing on the water. They came from the sky, arriving in great, dark clouds that blocked out the sun for 3 days and 3 nights. They landed on a mountain in the west, and when the clouds finally lifted, the Firbolg looked up and saw a new people in their land, a host of beings so radiant and beautiful that they seemed to be gods. And from their 4 cities they brought 4 great treasures. From Phileas they brought the Leofail, the stone of destiny. It was said that this stone would cry out under the true High King of Ireland, its voice a roar that would be heard across the entire island. From Gorias they brought the sword of Nuada, a weapon from which no one could escape once it was drawn from its scabbard. From Murias they brought the cauldron of the Dagda, a vessel from which no company would ever go away hungry, for it was a cauldron of endless plenty. And from Phineas they brought the spear of Lug, a spear so thirsty for battle that it had to be kept with its head dipped in a sleeping draught of poppy seeds, lest it fly from its owner's hand of its own accord. The Firbolg, seeing these shining newcomers and their powerful talismans, were filled with fear and suspicion. Their king Eokai sent his greatest champion, a warrior named Shreng, to meet with them. The Tuatha Dé Danann, in turn, sent their own champion, Brez. The 2 champions met in the middle of a great plain. They looked at each other, and they saw both their differences and their kinship. The Firbolg warrior was broad and strong, armed with a heavy, thick-headed spear. The Danann warrior was tall and graceful, his spear slender, light, and deadly sharp. They recognized each other as descendants of the same ancestor, Nemed, 2 branches grown from the same ancient root. Bray, on behalf of the Tuatha Dé Danann, made a generous offer. "We see this land is good," he said. "Let us divide it in 2. You keep 1 half, and we shall take the other. We can live as allies and kin." But the Firbolg, in their pride and their love for the whole of the land they had nurtured, refused. "If we give you half," their king said, "you will soon desire the whole. When did a province ever contain 2 kings? We will not give up what we have worked for. If you want this land, you must take it from us by strength of arms." And so it was decided. A battle would be fought. But it was a battle unlike any other. It was fought with a strange and noble courtesy. They agreed upon a time and a place, the plain of Mag Tuaird, the plain of towers. They agreed to a truce every night, so that each side could tend to their wounded, mend their weapons, and mourn their dead. For 4 days the battle raged. It was a clash of 2 worlds, the earthy strength of the Firbolg against the dazzling skill of the Tuatha Dé Danann, the heavy spears against the light, a clash of brute force against refined art. The Danann were faster, their magic confusing the Firbolg, but the Firbolg were strong and relentless, and they pushed the shining host back. On the final day, the 2 kings, Eokai of the Firbolg and Nuada of the Tuatha Dé Danann, met in the heart of the fray. They fought, and Nuada, with his superior skill, struck Eokai down. But in the same conflict, the great Firbolg champion Sreng swung his heavy sword and sheared off Nuada's right arm at the shoulder. With their king fallen, the Firbolg were defeated, but the Tuatha Dé Danann were noble in their victory. They offered the remaining Firbolg a choice. They could either leave Ireland, or they could choose one of the 5 provinces to be their own. Sreng in his wisdom chose the province of Connacht, the rugged and beautiful land in the west. And there the Firbolg remained, living in peace. And so the sovereignty of the island passed from the men of the bags to the people of the goddess Danu. A new age had begun. An age of magic, of poetry, of art, an age of gods. The Tuatha Dé Danann were now the masters of Eir. But their king, Nuada, could no longer rule, for the law of the Danann stated that their king must be physically perfect, without blemish. And so, with a wounded king and the ever-present threat of the Fomorians still lurking on the edges of the world, the golden age of the Tuatha Dé Danann began under a troubled sky. The storyteller's voice falls away, and the silence in the stone circle feels profound. The stones themselves seem to be listening, remembering that first great battle, that noble and sorrowful transfer of power. The moon is high now, a perfect silver disk in a sea of indigo, and the stars are scattered like diamond dust. The air is still and cold, carrying the clean scent of stone and the faint, sweet smell of night-blooming flowers you cannot see. You leave the circle of stones behind, following your guide as he moves deeper into the woods. The trees are different here. They are immense, ancient oaks, their limbs twisted into fantastic shapes, their bark thick and furrowed like the brows of old men. The ground is a tapestry of gnarled roots, and you must watch your step. The forest feels alive, breathing softly in the darkness around you. The Danann were masters of all the arts. The storyteller resumes, his voice a soft counterpoint to the rustling leaves. But they were not perfect. With Nuada unable to rule, they needed a king. They made a choice that would bring them great sorrow. They chose Brez, the champion who had first met with the Firbolg. He was chosen because he was young and beautiful, and his father was a Fomorian king. They hoped that by making him king, they could build a bridge to the Fomorians and ensure peace. It was a terrible mistake. Brez was beautiful on the outside, but his heart was small and mean. He was not a king of abundance, but a king of scarcity. Under his rule, the generosity that was the heart of the Danann way of life withered. He demanded tribute and labor from the greatest of the gods. He put the Dagda, the good god himself, to work building his fortress. He demanded that Ogma, the champion of eloquence, gather firewood. The poets and musicians of the court found themselves without patronage, their songs unheard, their harps unstrung. The land itself felt the shame of this miserly king. The rains did not fall, the crops failed, the cows gave no milk. The cauldron of the Dagda, which should have been overflowing, was empty. Laughter and song were replaced by grumbling and hardship. The generosity of a true king is a reflection of the generosity of the land, and with a miser on the throne, the land itself became miserly. The breaking point came when a wandering poet named Cair Pré came to Brez's court seeking hospitality. This was a sacred duty, the highest law of the land. But Brez gave him no feast, no comfortable bed, no gift for his song. He housed him in a small, dark, fireless hut, and gave him 3 small, dry cakes on a tiny plate for his dinner. In the morning, Cair Pré, insulted and angry, composed the first satire ever spoken in Ireland. It was a poem of biting mockery, and it held a powerful magic. He proclaimed, "Without food quickly on a dish, without a cow's milk on which a calf grows, without a man's abode in the dark of night, without paying a company of storytellers, let that be the condition of Brez." The words of a true poet have the power to shape reality. And as soon as the satire was spoken, it came true. Brez's power crumbled. 2 red blotches of shame appeared on his beautiful face, and he could no longer be king. Humiliated, he was deposed, and he fled from Tara, running to his Fomorian father for aid, his heart now filled with a burning desire for revenge. In his place, the Tuatha Dé Danann restored their rightful king. For Dian Cecht, the physician of the gods, a master of healing, had, with the help of the smith Craidhne, fashioned a new arm for Nuada. It was an arm of silver, articulated and moving as if it were made of flesh and blood, and so he was known forever after as Nuada Ergetlam, Nuada of the Silver Hand. With their true king restored, generosity and abundance returned to the land. The harvests were rich again, the rivers ran with fish, and the sound of music and laughter returned to the halls of Tara. It seemed that balance had been restored. But they all knew that Brez was not gone forever. They knew he was gathering the Fomorian hosts, preparing for a war that would decide the fate of the island, a war between the forces of art and light, and the forces of chaos and darkness. The storyteller pauses, leading you to a small, hidden hollow. Here, a spring bubbles up from deep within the earth, its water crystal clear. The hollow is lined with ferns, their delicate fronds unfurling in the moonlight. The air is filled with the clean, green scent of growing things. It feels like a place of healing and renewal. But a new light was coming, the storyteller says, his eyes reflecting the starlight. A hope they did not yet know they had. One evening, as King Nuada and the lords of the Danann were feasting in their great hall on the hill of Tara, a stranger appeared at the gate. The doorkeeper asked his name and his business. "I am Lug," the stranger said. He was young, and his face was as bright and beautiful as the rising sun, and I have come to offer my services to the king. The doorkeeper, as was his duty, asked, "What art do you profess? For no one without a specific art or skill may enter the halls of Tara." "I have a right," said Lug. "We have a right already," the doorkeeper replied. "We have no need of another." "Then I am a smith," said Lug. "We have a smith," said the doorkeeper. "Then I am a champion." "We have a champion." "Then," said Lug, his voice ringing with confidence, "I am a harpist." "We have a harpist, a poet and a historian. We have those too." "A sorcerer." "We have many sorcerers." "A physician." "We have," Diane checked himself. "A cupbearer." "We have 9. "A craftsman in brass and bronze." "We have one already." Lug was not deterred. He drew himself up to his full height, and his presence seemed to fill the gateway with light. "Then go and ask your king this," he said. "Does he have any one man in his court who possesses all of these skills combined?" The doorkeeper was stunned. He hurried inside and told King Nuada of the extraordinary youth at the gate. And the king was intrigued. "Let him in," he commanded. "A man like that has never come to Tara before." And so Luke entered the great hall. The assembled gods and heroes of the Tuatha Dé Danann fell silent, their eyes fixed on him. His radiance was like a physical force. Nuada, to test him, gestured to the great stone flag that normally took 80 oxen to move, and challenged Lug to move it. Lug, with no effort at all, lifted the massive stone and cast it out of the hall. Then he brought it back and set it perfectly in its place. Next, Nuada challenged him to a game of asterisk, official asterisk, the ancient game of strategy. Lug played with such brilliance and foresight that he defeated the king himself. Finally, Agma, the great champion, challenged him to a feat of strength, but Lug outmatched him with ease. Nuada looked at this brilliant, multi-talented youth, and he saw more than just a skilled craftsman or warrior. He saw a leader. He saw the one who could unite all the disparate powers of the Tuatha Dé Danann and lead them to victory against the coming Fomorian tide. He stood up, and for 13 days, he gave his own throne to the young stranger Lug. And Lug sat in the High King's seat, and he organized the defenses, assigning every god, every hero, every craftsman to the task for which they were best suited. He was not just a master of all arts, he was a master of masters. He was Lug Lamfrada, Lug of the long arm, for his reach and his influence extended everywhere. And they also called him the Ildanak, the master of all arts. With Luga to lead them, a new spirit of hope and purpose filled the Tuatha Dé Danann. They knew the final battle was coming, the one that would be known as the Second Battle of Mag Tuath. But now, they were not afraid. They had a sun to lead them out of the darkness. You walk on through the dreaming forest. The moon is directly overhead now, bathing the world in a soft, ethereal silver light. Every leaf, every blade of grass is etched in sharp detail, yet it all feels unreal, like a landscape from a half-remembered dream. The path you follow is barely visible, more of a feeling than a track, but the storyteller walks it with an easy, certain grace. You pass a grove of hazel trees, their branches heavy with nuts, and the storyteller gestures towards them. "Wisdom," he says softly. The hazelnut contains the concentrated wisdom of the world. It is the food of poets and seers. And the Tuatha Dé Danann had wisdom in abundance. They had figures like the Dagda, the good god. He was not good in the sense of being saintly, but good in the sense of being good Bantor, everything. He was a great warrior, a powerful druid, a skilled musician, and a king of boundless generosity. He possessed two of the great treasures. One was his cauldron, the Undri, which I have told you of, from which no one ever went away hungry. It was the symbol of his hospitality, his power to nurture and sustain his people. Imagine a feast that never ends, a warmth that never fades. That was the gift of the Dagda. His other great treasure was his harp, Uethni. It was a living thing, made of oak, and it was so beautiful that it could play music by itself. But when the Dagda played it, he was the master of all emotion. He could play 3 magical strains. The first was the *Giantrai*, the strain of joy. When he played it, all who heard it would be filled with uncontrollable laughter and delight, no matter how great their sorrow. The second was the *Goltrai*, the strain of sorrow. When he played this melody, everyone, from the mightiest warrior to the smallest child, would weep uncontrollably, their hearts filled with a deep and cathartic grief. But the most powerful was the third strain, the *Suantrai*, the strain of sleep. When the Dagda played this gentle, lulling melody, all who heard it would fall into a deep and peaceful slumber, forgetting all their troubles, all their fears. It was a music of perfect peace, of ultimate rest. The Dagda was a father figure, a protector. He was large, earthy, sometimes comical, but his power was immense. He was the strength of the land, its fertility, its unwavering ability to provide. He was the solid ground beneath their feet. And then there was Brigid, his daughter. She was a goddess of 3 faces, a triple power. She was the goddess of the forge, of the smith's fire that transforms hard metal into things of beauty and use. She was the power of creation, of shaping, of bringing new forms into the world. She was also the goddess of the healing well, of the cool, clear waters that spring from the earth to soothe and restore. She was the patron of physicians, her touch a balm for all wounds, her presence a promise of renewal. And thirdly, she was the goddess of the poem, of the fire of inspiration that burns in the mind of the bard. She was the sacred word, the flash of insight, the creative spark that gives birth to story and song. Fire, water, and inspiration, the forge, the well, and the poem. She was the flame of creativity that burned at the heart of the Tuatha Dé Danann. There were so many others. There was Diane Shecht, the healer, who could regrow limbs and bring the dead back to life by bathing them in his magical well. There was Ogma of the sun-like countenance, the inventor of the Ogham alphabet, the champion whose words were as mighty as his sword. And there was Manannán mac Lir, the god of the sea. Ah, Manannán. The storyteller's voice grows softer, more distant. He was not always with the others. He belonged to the sea, and his kingdom was the misty, mysterious realm that lies just beyond the horizon, the land of promise, the Otherworld. He rode the waves in his magical boat, the wave sweeper, which needed no sail or oar, but obeyed the thoughts of the person who steered it. His horse, Splendid Mane, could gallop across the water as if it were a solid plain. He wore a cloak of mist that could make him invisible and show any color he wished. He was a shapeshifter, a trickster, a guardian of the hidden ways. He was the magic at the edge of the world, the mystery of the depths, the keeper of secrets that the land dwellers could never know. You have reached the highest point of your journey. From a small outcrop of rock, you can look out over the forest canopy. It stretches out below you like a dark, breathing sea, bathed in the silver light of the moon. The world is utterly still, utterly silent. It feels as if you are standing on the roof of the night. And so they prepared, the storyteller says, his gaze on the far horizon. All these gods, all these masters of art and magic, gathered their strength under the leadership of Lugh. The time for the final confrontation had come. The Fomorians, led by the vengeful Briz and their one-eyed king, Balor of the Evil Eye, amassed a fearsome army. They were the forces of brute strength, of chaos, of darkness. Balor's single eye was so poisonous that it could kill anyone it looked upon. He kept it closed most of the time, and it took 4 men to lift the eyelid when he wished to use its power. The two great hosts met once again on the plain of Mag Tuatha. For days the battle raged. It was a war of magic. The sorcerers of the Danann chanted spells that turned the stones of the plain into a host of phantom soldiers, confusing the Fomorian ranks. The Fomorian druids conjured thick, cloying clouds of darkness to blind their enemies, but the druids of the Danann blew the clouds back upon them. Diankect and his children stood by their healing well. When a Danann warrior was slain, they would carry him to the well and immerse him in its waters, and he would rise up again, whole and ready to fight once more, though he could not speak. The Dagda with his great club was a force of nature on the battlefield. It was said one end of his club could kill 9 men with a single blow, while the other end could bring them back to life. He smashed through the Fomorian lines like a thunderstorm. But the Fomorians were powerful, and their numbers were seemingly endless. The battle hung in the balance. Tuatha, the king, fighting with his silver hand, was confronted by Balor himself. Before Tuatha could act, Balor had his attendants lift the lid of his terrible eye. The venomous gaze fell upon Tuatha, and the noble king of the Tuatha Dé Danann fell dead upon the field. A cry of despair went up from the Danann ranks. Their king was gone. It seemed that all was lost. But then a great light shone from the back of their lines. It was Lugh. He had been held in reserve, for the other gods feared that one so young and brilliant should not be risked. But now his time had come. He strode to the front of the battle, his face blazing like the sun. He began to chant a powerful spell, hopping on one foot and closing one eye, a posture of great magical potency. He circled the battlefield, and his presence inspired the Danann with a strength they did not know they possessed. He called out to Balor, his own grandfather, for Lugh was the child of a Danann father and Balor's own daughter. "Turn your face to me, Balor," he cried. "Let me see this famous eye of yours." The Fomorians, eager for a swift end to the battle, hurried to lift the great, heavy eyelid of their king. As the poisonous eye began to open, its gaze fixed on Lugh, the young god took his sling and a single stone. He swung it once, with all his might, and let the stone fly. The stone flew with perfect, magical accuracy. It struck Balor's eye with such force that it drove the eye right through the back of his head. The venomous gaze, now facing backwards, fell upon the Fomorian army itself. A whole rank of Balor's own warriors was annihilated by the power of his dying curse. With their king and their greatest weapon destroyed, the Fomorian army broke. The Tuatha Dé Danann pursued them, driving them back into the sea from whence they came, scattering them forever. The victory was total. The battle was won. The age of the gods was secured. The light had triumphed over the darkness, and the island of Eire was finally and truly theirs. The storyteller falls silent. The vast, moonlit panorama before you seems to hold the echo of that great magical battle. You can almost see the phantom armies clashing on the plains below, hear the spells being chanted on the wind, see the final, brilliant flash of Luke's victory. A deep, profound peace settles over the forest. The struggle is over. Balance has been won. You turn from the high place and begin your descent, following the storyteller down a winding, gentle slope on the other side of the hill. The trees here are different again. Tall, slender silver birches and whispering aspens. Their leaves tremble in the slightest breeze, creating a constant, soft, shushing sound, like the sea on a distant shore. It is a sound that invites sleep. "Victory," the storyteller says, his voice now softer, more melancholic. But victory is never the end of the story. Life goes on, and with it comes sorrow. For joy and sorrow are two threads woven into the same cloth. The golden age of the Danann was beautiful, but it was not eternal. And one of the most beautiful and most sorrowful tales from that time is the tale of the children of Lyr. You come to a lake, hidden deep within the forest. It is perfectly still, a flawless mirror of black glass reflecting the moon and the stars. Not a ripple disturbs its surface. Reeds stand motionless at its edge, and the air is heavy with the scent of water lilies. It is a place of profound and sorrowful beauty. You sit on the mossy bank, and the storyteller sits beside you, his gaze on the dark, still water. Lir was one of the lords of the Tuatha Dé Danann, a king in his own right, often associated with the sea, like Manannan. After the great battle, a new high king was chosen, Bob Dirg, the son of the Dagda. Lir felt he should have been chosen, and he left the court in anger. But Bob Dirg was a wise and gracious king, and he wished for peace. To heal the rift, he offered Lir the choice of one of his own foster daughters for a wife. Lir chose the eldest, a beautiful woman named Aib. He loved her dearly, and she gave him 4 beautiful children. First came a daughter, Fionnuala, whose name means white shoulder. Then came a son, Aed, whose name means fire. And then came twin boys, Fiatra and Khan. They were the delight of their father's heart, and the joy of all the Tuatha Dé Danann. But a shadow fell upon their happiness. Aeve, their mother, grew ill and died, leaving Lir heartbroken and his 4 children without a mother. Bod Badirg, seeing Lir's grief, offered him another of his foster daughters to be his wife and a mother to his children. Her name was Eoife. At first, Eoife loved the children, but she was a proud woman, and soon a terrible jealousy began to grow in her heart. She saw the immense love that Lir had for his children, and she saw the attention and admiration they received from everyone. She began to feel that she was second in their father's heart, and a poisonous envy took root and twisted her soul. This envy grew until it became a burning hatred. She decided she had to be rid of the children. First, she tried to persuade her servants to kill them, but they refused, horrified. Then, one day, she took the 4 children with her on a journey to visit their grandfather, Bodbi Dirg. She led them to this very lake, Loch Deravara, the Lake of the Oaks. She told them to go and bathe in the cool water. The children, suspecting nothing, laughed and splashed and played in the lake. As they swam, Eoife took out a druid's wand and spoke a terrible spell of transformation. "Out with you, upon the wild waves, you children of the king," she cried. "Your friends shall be the flocks of birds for the rest of your long lives." And in an instant their soft skin was covered in feathers, their arms became great white wings, and their human voices were changed into the plaintive cries of swans. 4 beautiful white swans now floated on the water where the 4 children had been playing. But though their forms were changed, their minds, their memories, and their hearts remained human. Fionnuala, the eldest, turned her swan's head to her stepmother and cried out, "Wicked woman, what have you done to us? This is an evil deed, and you will be punished for it more terribly than we will." "Your cries cannot help you now," Eoife said, her heart cold as stone. "You will remain in this shape until a woman from the south is joined with a man from the north, until you hear the sound of a Christian bell, and until Lugh of the Long Arm is king again in Ireland." She knew these conditions were impossible, a promise of eternal torment. But the children wept and pleaded with her, and even in her wickedness, a tiny sliver of pity remained. She granted them 2 consolations. "You will keep your own minds and your own speech," she said, "and you will be able to sing the most beautiful music the world has ever heard, a music so sweet that it will soothe all sorrow and lull all who hear it to sleep. Now tell me the length of your sentence." And a terrible knowledge filled Fionnuala's mind. "We will spend 300 years here, on this calm lake of Deravara," she said, her voice full of sorrow. "Then we will spend 300 years on the cold, stormy Sea of Moyle between Ireland and Scotland. And finally, we will spend 300 years at the Isle of Inishglora, off the western coast, 900 years in the shape of swans." Eoife, her cruel work done, left them there and went on to her father's court. When Bod Badirg asked where the children were, she lied and said that Lir did not trust him with them. But Bod Badirg was suspicious and sent messengers to Lir, who, filled with a sudden dread, was already on his way. Lir came to the shores of this lake and saw the 4 white swans. He heard them call his name, and Fionnuala told him the terrible story of what Eoife had done. A grief beyond all measure fell upon Lir and his followers. They sat here on this very bank and wept. But then the swans began to sing, and the music they made was so enchantingly beautiful, so filled with a sweet, piercing sadness, that it eased the pain in their hearts. Lir and his people made their home on the shores of the lake so they could be near the children, listening to their music every day. And people came from all over Ireland, the Tuatha Dé Danann and the Fir Bolg alike, to listen to the singing of the swans. For those 300 years, the shores of this lake were a place of pilgrimage, a place of sorrow, but also of unearthly peace. The music of the swans was a comfort to all who were in trouble or sickness. But 300 years, even for the long-lived Danann, is a long, long time. The day came when their time on the lake was over. They had to say farewell to their father and their people, and fly north to the bitter, storm-tossed Sea of Moyle. Fionnuala gathered her 3 brothers under her wings, and they rose into the air, their sorrowful cries echoing across the water. Their life on the Sea of Moyle was one of terrible hardship. They endured freezing winds, crashing waves, and the cruel salt spray that froze their wings to the rocks at night. They were often separated by terrible storms, and Fionnuala's greatest fear was that one of her brothers would be lost to the waves. But they always found each other again, and they would comfort each other with their songs, though now their music was mingled with the howling of the wind and the roar of the sea. They saw the ships of men passing in the distance, but they were utterly alone. Their people were far away, and their world was one of gray sea and gray sky. After 300 years of this torment, their time on the Moyle was done. They flew to the western coast, to the Isle of Inishglora. The sea here was kinder, and they found a small, saltwater pool where they could rest. Their long exile was nearing its end. They were old now. Their feathers were gray and ragged, their bodies weary from 9 centuries of hardship. They had outlived their father, their grandfather, and almost everyone they had ever known. The world of the Tuatha Dé Danann, their golden world of Tara, had faded into legend. One morning they heard a sound they had never heard before. It was a thin, clear, metallic sound, ringing out across the water. It was the sound of a Christian bell. A new age had come to Ireland. A new faith, a new people. They followed the sound and came to a small church where a holy man named Mochua was saying his prayers. He was frightened at first by the sight of the 4 great birds who could speak with human voices. But they told him their story, the long, sad tale of their enchantment. The holy man was filled with pity. He took them in, cared for them, and had a master smith forge delicate silver chains to link them together, so they would not be separated. The swans lived with him, and their beautiful music now mingled with the sound of his prayers and the ringing of his bell. The prophecy of their release was coming true. The local king heard of the miraculous singing swans and demanded them for his queen. He came to the holy man's church to take them by force. But as he laid his hands on them, a terrible transformation occurred. Their feathers fell away, and they were returned to their human forms. But they were not the beautiful children they had once been. They were ancient, withered, and gray, stooped with the age of 900 years. The king and his men cried out in shock and fear. Fionnuala knew their end was near. She asked the holy man to baptize them so they could die in the new faith of Ireland. And then she asked him to bury them together, just as they had lived together for so long. Con on her right side, Fiachra on her left, and Aid between her arms. And so, as the holy man finished the rites, they died. Their long, long journey was over. Their spirits were finally free from the burden of their enchantment and their immense age. They were at peace at last. The storyteller's voice is almost a whisper. The silence that follows is not empty, but filled with the weight of the 900-year story. The lake before you seems to hold the memory of that first, terrible transformation and the endless patience of the swans. The moon has begun its slow descent towards the west, and the stars seem to have shifted in the sky. The night is old now, very old. You feel a sense of immense peace. The peace that comes after a long and sorrowful tale has been told to its gentle end. The story of the swans, with its long, slow, repetitive passage of time, has carried you deeper and deeper into a state of calm. You rise and walk on, leaving the silent lake behind. The forest path is now bathed in a pre-dawn light, a soft, gray luminescence that is neither night nor day. The air is cool and damp with dew. You can hear the first tentative chirps of the birds, waking in the branches above. All things fade, the storyteller says, his voice blending with the waking sounds of the forest. Even the golden age of the gods. While the children of Lear were living out their long sorrow, The world of man was changing. A new people came to Ireland, the final wave of invaders. They were the Milesians, the sons of Mil, who came from Spain. They were not gods, but mortals. They were poets and warriors, but their magic was not the magic of the Danann. They were the ancestors of the Gaels, the people who live in this land today. They landed in the south and sent their chief poet, Emergin, to speak with the Tuatha Dé Danann. Emergin stood on the shore, with one foot on the land and one in the sea, and he spoke a great poem of claiming, weaving his own spirit into the spirit of the island. The Tuatha Dé Danann met them, and their 3 queens, Eriu, Bamba, and Fodla, each asked that the island be named after them. Emergin promised that the chief name of the island would be Eriu, which is why it is called Ireland to this day. But the Danann did not wish to give up their land. They used their magic to cast illusions, making the island appear as a barren rock, or sending a magical storm to drive the Milesian ships back out to sea. But the Milesians had their own druids and their own strength, and they overcame the magic. A great battle was fought, and the Tuatha Dé Danann were defeated, not through a lack of skill or power, but perhaps because their time was over. The age of myth was giving way to the age of men. But they did not leave Ireland. A council was held between the leaders of the Milesians and the leaders of the Danann, and it was Emergin, the poet, who proposed the solution. The island would be divided, but not into provinces of land. It would be divided horizontally. The sons of Mil and their descendants would have the world above ground. He decreed, the fields, the forests, the hills, the world of the sun and the rain. And the Tuatha Dé Danann would have the world below ground, the hollow hills, the ancient burial mounds, the secret places under the earth. And so it was agreed. The Tuatha Dé Danann did not die. They did not flee. They simply withdrew. They retreated into the ancient mounds, the *CD. They passed from the world of sight into the world of spirit. They became the *AOC*, the people of the mounds, the fairy folk. They did not vanish entirely. Their world and ours still touch. They are still here, in the whisper of the wind, in the shimmering heat on a summer's day, in the mist that clings to the river in the morning. They became the hidden magic of the land, its secret soul. The Dagda, Lug, Brigid, Manannan, they are all still here. They simply live in a different room of the same great house. And sometimes on nights like this, when the world is quiet and your heart is open, the door between the rooms can swing open, just for a moment. You have come full circle. You stand now at the edge of the forest where your journey began. The sky to the east is no longer black, but a soft, pale gray, tinged with the faintest hint of rose and gold. The morning star hangs bright and clear in the fading night. The world is holding its breath, waiting for the dawn. The storyteller turns to you. His ancient eyes are kind, and his smile is gentle. The first rays of the rising sun touch the tops of the trees, setting them ablaze with a quiet, golden fire. The story is a circle, he says, his voice now very soft, like the rustling of the last leaves of autumn. It begins with the land, and to the land it returns. The gods fade into the hills, and the hills remember them. Every sunrise is a new beginning, but it is also a memory of all the sunrises that have come before. The world is full of sleeping magic, waiting for those with quiet hearts to listen. My part of the journey is over, but yours continues. Carry the quiet of this forest with you. Remember the patience of the land, the magic of the Tuatha Dé Danann, the long sorrow of the swans, and the peace that comes with the dawn. The story is in you now, just as it is in the stones and the water and the trees. As the sunlight grows stronger, filtering down through the branches, the storyteller begins to fade. His form becomes translucent, like mist in the morning sun. His voice becomes the whisper of the wind in the leaves, his presence the scent of damp earth and moss. The tap of his staff becomes the gentle rhythm of your own heart. Soon there is nothing left but the ancient forest, waking to a new day. You stand alone at the edge of the wood, but you are not the same as when you entered. You feel a deep, calm stillness within you. The stories you have heard are not just tales. They are the dreams of the land itself, and you have been dreaming with it. The world of haste and worry seems very far away. Here, there is only the gentle light of the new day, the soft sounds of the waking birds, and the profound, peaceful silence of the ancient earth. And now, as the sun finally rises above the horizon, flooding the world with its gentle, golden warmth, you can rest. Close your eyes. Breathe in the clean morning air. The journey is over. The story is told. Sleep now. Sleep deep. And dream of the magic that sleeps in the heart of the world.